Okay, everyone, just getting finished setting up here, but we're going to be having a guest on shortly. I've sent him the link, so he should be in here soon. I do want to, of course, give just shout outs. In the description of the video, I've left his YouTube channel. And I'll also be pulling up, I think his book was reinstated. I want to get this from Amazon. But hopefully I have a nice conversation today that's informative and let's see. Oh. Here we go. Okay. Yes, his book is back on. So that's good news. I'm excited about that. Stacy in the chat says Kamala sucks. Well, it should be civil, I think. I generally keep it civil here, don't you think? I mean, the chat doesn't always, but... But yes, it should be civil as well. We tend to keep it civil. How silly. Okay. Yeah, so let's get the, so you can subscribe to my guest here. Oh, no. Look at me. I'm such a boomer sometimes. It's ridiculous. Okay. Okay, good. I'm live. Oh, he's here. Good. Okay, everyone. Let me get him in here. All right, y'all. So without further ado.
Hello.
Welcome back to the channel. Good to see you.
Glad to be here. Good to see
You've
you.
had quite a week.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. This has been an adventure.
Yes, I did see that. Okay, so backstory. When did Kamala announce her running? It was last week, right?
Yes, Biden dropped out Sunday, July 21st. And so Monday, the media started giving the presumptive nominee treatment to Kamala Harris. And that's the same day that I got an email telling me that there was something wrong with the cover of this book that I wrote 4 years prior. And I thought that was odd. And it gave me the option of just changing the cover or submitting documentation to prove I had the rights to the cover. So I figured, okay, with Kamala being hot in the news right now, I'm just going to try to make sure that this book is out there. So I put a completely blank, template cover on it and resubmitted, rejected. Next morning, I woke up, tried again, resubmitted, rejected, tried again, resubmitted, rejected. So I put the book up on Lulu and started raising the alarm. then on Lulu, it started selling like crazy. I sold, about 300 of them on Lulu. And then Lulu stopped processing people's credit cards. If you tried to buy it on Lulu, all of a sudden your credit card would not go through. And so I put it up on Gumroad, which is where it's up on there now. The PDF, you can get it for $10 on Gumroad, and you just get an electronic copy of it, the PDF. I went on all the shows and talked about it. This was the wildest thing. I did not see this coming. I figured there might be a slight uptick in sales, but I didn't think they would ban it from Amazon, and then the whole universe would get mad at them for what they were so obviously doing. So then Monday, after I had submitted it and it just shot it back to me like 6 times. Then Monday night, last night, I received an email around the same time. This time, I think the email removing it was at 7:26 p.m. local time. This was around 7:12 p.m. local time. And the email with no explanation, no details. Your paperback book has been published. So now it's back up on Amazon as if nothing happened. And now Lulu is processing people's credit cards again, magically at the same time. Something is very, very, very odd about the entire situation.
Indeed, indeed.
And I'm really grateful for all the support I have gotten. And I've been making my rounds of the talk shows and just talking about the contents of the book. I wrote this 4 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And let me just get out of my system before we get too deep into this, right? I do work for RT. I'm very proud of the work that I do with RT. And I have met the Russian president. I think he's a great guy. He's a force for good in the world. We've been in the same room on multiple occasions. And there was a time, in March where we got to have like a back and forth about the situation in the United States and all of that.
That was brilliant, actually.
Thank you.
Move over, Tucker.
Well, thank you. But no Russian had anything to do with this book. And let me just get that out there, because that may be what comes up if there's legal cases. They're going to try to say, well, this is a Russian conspiracy. I wrote this 4 years ago. And if I had gone to RT and said, hey, I'm writing a book about Kamala Harris, they would have probably tried to stop me and said, don't rock the boat. Don't, you know what I mean? That was so that this book is not a Russian conspiracy to affect the elections. And in fact, there's language against Trump in the 3rd chapter of it that's pretty harsh. So, I wrote it 4 years ago. It's been on sale for 4 years. In that whole time, I sold 595 copies of it at that, And since then, I have sold, I've sold well over 1,000 copies in the last week. I mean, this book is getting around. Let me just put it that way. And
Indeed,
it shows.
I'd imagine so.
Yes, it shows there's something that people would like to suppress. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read it yet yourself or not.
No, I didn't even know you had it. You're so prolific. Like, how many books have you written at this point?
I don't. It's hard to say. Like the Green Book. I didn't write this. I wrote the introduction to it by Gaddafi. So it's really hard to say. Like, where do you draw the line?
We're going to be going over that at some point on this channel. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll let you know when that starts.
Very good. But let's talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'm here to answer your questions. And, I don't know what this means. I do realize I'm on a list or something. So I don't know where this ends up, if Kamala Harris becomes president and, they suddenly decide I'm guilty of some financial crime or something. I don't know, but we'll see. So thanks for having me on. It's been a stressful week. It's been a good week. I'm happy about all the attention I'm getting. Also a little nervous about what this could mean for the future, but we shall see. So.
Yeah, indeed. It's always a difficult thing when a lot of eyes are on you, how to handle it and what comes of it. But hopefully, most people are supportive and it all works out for the best. I guess I was interested in this for a number of reasons. Obviously, I was kind of stunned at what's been happening with the election this year. It's probably one of the more exciting election cycles I've ever lived through. Actually, I would say it is the most exciting. But it's also been kind of strange to see like what's happening on the Democratic Party side. And I'm an independent politically. I'm not affiliated with either party. And sorry, Stacy in the chat is always diagnosing people's Myers-Briggs type, so I just had to chuckle at that. I'll try not to pay too much attention to chat. Although if anyone has questions during the chat or during the filming of this, please leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. But yeah, I thought it was fascinating that this book came out 4 years ago. So I assume what I first wanted to know is what inspired you, or what kind of motivated you to write the book initially. I suppose it was her rise as the VP candidate, and also her run for president. But I'd like to know more about that and how you got into that, did your research, and what you found most interesting or most important to share about her.
Well, it started with someone I came across who had worked with her father in an academic capacity. And he told me about how her father was a communist and was a very active communist at one point in the Bay Area many years ago, which really surprised me. And I was like, really? Kamala Harris? I mean, I thought I might have believed that if he told me Bernie Sanders' parents were communists or something, but I thought that was a little bit odd. And so then I started doing research into Kamala Harris, and I didn't like what I found about her being a vicious prosecutor, about her misconduct, etc. And then, she ran for president in the primary, and Donald Harris, her Marxist father, denounced her campaign and wrote this very powerful essay. And so I just started digging and digging and digging.
Interesting. So I didn't know about her father actually writing an essay. I thought they were just estranged from what I understood of it, but I've not really dug into her backstory at all.
Well, there you go. It's better than a Marvel movie. Let me put it that way. So Kamala Harris was running for president in 2020 in the Democratic primary, and she appeared on a radio show called The Breakfast Club. And on The Breakfast Club, they asked her, "Hey, have you ever smoked marijuana?" And she said, "Oh, yes, she loved to puff the fat daddies or whatever. She loved weed or whatever." And they asked her, what music was playing while she smoked weed. And she said, "Oh, had to be Snoop, which then people looked at the mathematics and they said, that's interesting because Snoop Dogg had not released an album at the time she was in college when she supposedly smoked weed. I think I was on a show earlier this week and someone said she must have had some really good weed because she was hearing music from the future. That's
why I've always found her very disingenuous, or something about her just isn't right. And it's not that she's odd or something, it's that she's lying. And I get that feeling like she's not a person. Yeah.
So after she said that she smoked weed in college and it had to be Snoop who she was listening to and all of this, then she said, "Oh, half my family's from Jamaica. What do you think?" Well, her father was not thrilled with that comment. So he came forward to the media and he said that he wanted to distance himself and his entire Jamaican family from this travesty of identity politics, he called it. And that he said that we do not appreciate the stereotype of Jamaicans as lazy, pot-smoking joy seekers. It was pretty intense. And so then he wrote this essay called Reflections of a Jamaican Father, which I quote extensively in the book, which is about 10 pages long. And he's very careful with his words. And I noticed that they have really, he wrote a book that was widely circulated, an academic Marxist book on the problem of unemployment and how it relates to Marxist theory of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. And that book has been completely scrubbed. For a while, there was one copy of it on Amazon that cost $1,000, and now it's gone. It's just gone. You can't find it anywhere. I've got images, like stills, of a C-SPAN appearance that he did, but C-SPAN has removed it from the archives, so you can't see his speech on C-SPAN about economics when he was speaking as a Stanford professor. They've tried to cover it up. Now, there are newspaper articles about him, getting fired from a previous job before he taught at Stanford, and students protesting about it because they considered it to be political and because he was a Marxist. So there's a lot there. But I wrote the book. When Kamala became the VP nominee, I thought I have to write a book. And it was the pandemic time, and I was sitting around the house, and I had a lot of time, and it was my pandemic book. And I will say it is not just a partisan hit piece on Kamala Harris. It is so much more than that. Because I am above that. I would be bored writing a partisan hit piece on Kamala Harris. I wrote an essay in 3 parts that makes 3 political points about America and where we're going and the political spectrum and how confused things are. And I use Kamala to make those 3 points. The first the first point in the book, the first chapter, is called "Where Did Kamala Harris Come From?" And I talk about, quoting from Kamala Harris's autobiography and from other sources and material, I talk about how Kamala Harris grew up in Oakland, California, when both of her parents were attending UC Berkeley. That's where they met. And that she grew up in the New Left, and that, California and the Bay Area was the center of activist, politics back then, the left, etc. But it was also the center of U.S. intelligence operations to manipulate and confuse leftist politics. And how, starting with the fall of Joe McCarthy, late 50s up into the early 60s, there was a huge amount of government funding for various communist and leftist groups that was like covertly given to them. But in the process, their politics and their worldview shifted. Right. And that this coincides with Project MK Ultra. This coincides with like the mass marketing of the Beatles and the 60s cultural revolution, and that leftist politics was being reinvented in the 1960s. And Kamala Harris grew up in the center of it. And one thing she talks about in her autobiography is that after her parents split apart, her mother really wanted her and her sister to have some connection to their Black heritage. So they spent a lot of time at a cultural center in Oakland called Rainbow Sign. And Rainbow Sign Cultural Center was a Black cultural center that was set up by James Baldwin and some of James Baldwin's associates, possibly Ralph Ellison also. And these were intellectuals who were being promoted by the CIA as an alternative to the communist wing of Black liberation. The Black Panthers were very popular in Oakland, California. They were supporting North Korea, supporting China and Russia and countries like that. And the Black Cultural Center Rainbow Sign was set up by intellectuals who were anti-communist in the Black community. And Kamala Harris spent a lot of her childhood there. She was involved in plays there, etc. And that center itself is a result of, U.S. government manipulation and attempts to manipulate the Black liberation movement away from being aligned with communist countries. And that's the first chapter. I just talk about how the New Left was fake and it was manipulated. And I mean, there's no question that Kamala Harris's parents were probably in or very close to one of the major communist organizations in the Bay Area during the early 1960s. We don't know which group it was, but they were at UC Berkeley. They were going to anti-Vietnam War and civil rights protests. That's how they met. And her father was a Marxist economist who was giving classes on, the Marxist economic theories. So, in that area at the time, you have the Progressive Labor Party, which was a very pro-China breakaway from the Communist Party. You have the Berkeley Independent Socialist Club, which eventually became the International Socialist Organization, what we knew as the ISO, that started in Berkeley. There's an individual in Berkeley during this year whose father was on the Berkeley School Board, whose father was also a prominent California judge who served on the California Supreme Court, and that was Bob Avakian, who leads the Revolutionary Communist Party. There were a number of different communist factions that were around in the Bay Area during those years. And if her father was an ideological Marxist, he would have been a member of one of those groups, or at least very, very close to one. And those groups were heavily monitored by the FBI. So I want to know why the FBI files on her father are not available, right? Anyone who was around any of those organizations was being very closely monitored by the FBI. So there is an FBI file somewhere that says what group her parents were in. And I want to know where it is. I mean, I guess it's probably been disappeared, kind of like my book was. But her parents were in some kind of communist organization at the time. They divorced when she was 4 years old. She says, they only fought over the books in her autobiography. But actually, her father, in his Reflections of a Jamaican Father, says that there was a custody battle, and the fact that he was, I'm quoting him, not colorful, not friendly language. This is what he says: a Negro from the islands who might eat his daughters for breakfast. That's how the courts viewed him. That's why he lost custody of his daughters. So the fact that that she invoked the pot smoking stereotype of Jamaicans really hurt him. It was a real punch in the gut.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that, she is touted, so much of her Blackness is touted in the media, and people are very into that. People who are into these identity politics kind of lead with that about her, but it doesn't seem to be that big a part of her identity, as it were. I mean, most people don't even, see her as Black, for one, from what I can, just from what I see, people reacting to her. So I'll leave it at that. People on the internet reacting, but we'll leave that for what it is. But it is an interesting piece, and to hear that she was, it sounds like she's been estranged from her father for a long time.
Yes. There is a photograph of her and her sister with him as adults, but he did not attend her inauguration as president. He lives in Jamaica. He's 85 years old. He will not do interviews. Trust me, I've tried. And
he doesn't need the trouble, it sounds like.
Well, no. And his essay is written in an almost coded way. He drops little hints. One of the things he talks about is one of his greatest regrets is that Kamala never met his mother, her grandmother, who was a member of parliament in Jamaica from the Labor Party. And he talks about how his mother taught him about the labor theory of value from Karl Marx. And that his mother was a very important figure in the Labor Party, like the social democratic party of Jamaica, which is very interesting. But people have tried to wonder, why did they pull my book, right? But the first thing you have to remember is, at this point, unless something new has been published, there are really only two books that are critical of Kamala Harris that have ever been published. One is my book, and the other is a book published by the Washington Times Press, which was published earlier this year, which is called Amateur Hour. And there are only two books about Kamala Harris out there that are negative. I mean, there's a lot of like fluff pieces. There's like some nice children's books about how she's going to be the first woman Black president, and and all of that. But in terms of like books that criticize her and analyze her with any level of criticism, there's only two, and mine is one of them. The other thing that people pointed out is that my book, at the time I wrote it, I was much more in line with mainstream leftism than I am now. And I still am very much an advocate of socialism. I'm an anti-imperialist, but at the time I wrote it, I was still very much in the mainstream leftist world to some degree or other. And this is very much a critique from the left. And that is where Kamala is dangerous, is weak, right? This book isn't going to change any Trump supporters' opinions of her. They already don't like her. And the issues I hit her with, they may not care about. But this is a critique from the left. It goes after the issue of fatherhood, which is a very important issue in the Black community, as Kamala Harris is trying to make herself appear to be African American, And then on top of that, Kamala Harris is very much trying to present herself as if she is an African American woman. So the idea that she hates her Black father and is estranged from her Black father doesn't really reinforce that. It kind of, gets into it. Kamala idealizes her mother. Her mother is a saint. Her mother can do no wrong. But she never talks about her father. Her father denounced her campaign. I have noted, and throughout the book, I talk about no other politician that I have ever heard of talks about their childhood as much as Kamala Harris talks about hers. Right?
Yeah. We're always being subjected to her girlhood. And it's rather infantilizing, too, for a woman in that kind of position of leadership to consistently be referencing her girlhood. There's something very strange about it, I find.
You can get a T-shirt, "That Little Girl Was Me," with 10-year-old Kamala Harris on it.
Right.
The latest one is that we can't make fun of her laugh now because she was bullied for her laugh when she was a child. That uncomfortable laugh that comes up at very, very uncomfortable and awkward moments, right? And what that laugh is, mind you, that laugh is very much, it's to cover anger. She's been advised by her PR team, if you get angry, that scares people, so laugh, right? And Hillary Clinton does the same thing, and it is to conceal anger, but it doesn't do a really good job because it's like, ha, 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 it's like that. That's how it kind of looks, right? I mean, and people are comparing her to the Joker and all of that. But her latest thing is she now saying she was bullied for her laugh. Her laugh comes from her mother. It's her mother's laugh, and her mother is this saint, and all these childhood memories. So it's weird, right? And that she often invokes her childhood. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm struck by, again, the infantilization of women in politics. And again, and it's if this is our first female president, we're in a world of hurt. Because where is the leadership here that's consistently this victimhood, this identity politics? It doesn't promote or inspire a strong type of leadership style.
Not at all.
In my view, I don't have much confidence in people who, and we can't talk about her laugh because she was bullied for it. I mean, really? You're a grown woman. Like, people make fun of my laugh. I mean, come on. It's just, of course, I'm not running for president, but I'm consistently struck by this kind of weird culture we're experiencing right now. For one, where the identity politics, the victimhood being weaponized, and just, I don't know.
Well, it goes beyond that.
Falseness of who people present themselves as.
It goes beyond that. And by the way, I'm sharing the link so more people will join. So there you go. I just shared it.
Wonderful. And yeah, I did share a link for your channel and a link to buy the book.
Thank you.
In the chat. But if there's any other links, I know you said you were on Gumroad and Lulu. If you could post them in our private chat, and I can repost them in the main chat.
All right, sure. And I'm tweeting this out too. It says tune in. So.
Oh, lovely.
So yeah, we got that, and let's just enjoy ourselves. The evening is young, as they say. Right? It's very young over where you are, right? You're on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's bright out. I'm like trying to get my lighting. I've got it on bright. I've got multiple lights on it, and it's still coming in dark. So it is what it is.
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris invokes her childhood at times when she's doing things that are less than ethical. For example, there's a clip of her talking about how she locked up parents for truancy, right? When their children were absent from school. She prosecuted parents.
Right, I remember hearing about that, yeah.
And she began the clip begins with her talking about how she wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for the education that she received, right? So it's about her, right? And that not giving a child an education is tantamount to a crime. And she started prosecuting parents, and then she starts giggling and laughing about it. And then she starts talking about her big stick and how she had some political capital and she was going to use it. And she had a big stick, and she was going to use that. And there was some parent somewhere who got a letter in the mail and showed it to the kids and said, "Oh, you better go to school or else Kamala's going to throw both of us in jail." And it was just so great. And it's like, this is demented, right? I mean, there's the famous clip where she went after Joe Biden. It was one of those "I'm not calling you racist, but" situations, right? Where she went after Biden for the fact that he had taken a position in opposition to school busing at one point. And she started talking about her own childhood, how she was bused. She was one of the first children bused to an integrated school in Oakland, and that little girl was me. And it was a situation. That's where the catchphrase "that little girl was me" came from, that she then made T-shirts of and all of that. And there's other instances that have come out since I wrote the book. I mean, it's been 4 years. We've had 4 years of this. I mean, everything I wrote in the book was way more true than I even knew at the time. But I'm so
glad you did write this book. I mean, wow. And it's awesome that it's available now too.
Yeah, well, I guess it was getting so much publicity about the fact that it had been removed that I think, and also there's a huge blowback right now about the tech, what happened, right? I mean, it's not just that this book was removed. It's also that, Google searches for Donald Trump were suppressed. You can't Google search assassination attempt of Donald Trump.
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah, there's a big explosion now. Everyone's angry about all the tech monopolies for how they, like if you search Donald Trump, what comes up is Donald Trump's reaction to Kamala Harris. I mean, it's like they're just doing everything right now. And so there's that. That's probably why I assume Lulu and Amazon, suddenly changed their position. Well,
it's also interesting that it went after the copyright of the photo on the cover. And I find that copyright strikes are often used to censor. It's one of those things that they can get you down for a short period of time. They may not win it eventually, but you do find that it can really make your content take a hit. I've seen multiple people have issues with this over the years.
Yeah, well, this original cover, which if anyone has one, it's a collector's item now because this book is no longer in print as is.
And you got that created for the book.
And it's credited to Arthur Porter. Arthur Porter, a guy who lives in Arizona, designed this for me. He did a great job, and it's original artwork. And they did not. It wasn't like a copyright strike on Amazon. It was just kind of we want you to provide a certified letter that you have the right to this or something. And it wasn't clear. And I just wanted the book out there because of the timing. I was just like, let's get this book out there. And then the fact that it didn't get back up for 7 days, the timing, we can tell what's going on here. And Max Blumenthal spoke up on my behalf, which I appreciated. Jimmy Dore spoke up on my behalf, had me on his show, Kim Iverson, others. I mean, it's really great to see people being supportive, right? Because we see where this is going. We see what the ultimate conclusion of this is, and I mean, people are waking up. I don't know if you saw, but today, Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, a country that, Donald Trump was not good to as president, he spoke up and he said the same system that murdered John F. Kennedy and tried to murder Donald Trump is now trying to destabilize Venezuela. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of Venezuela supporting communists who don't appreciate that and are mad that he said that, but it's the truth. And, and it's a very big thing for Maduro to say because Donald Trump, the U.S. government under Trump's leadership tried to overthrow him, tried to have a coup against him. But Maduro understands that it's not Donald Trump personally that's trying to overthrow him. It's the American imperialist state apparatus. And that American imperialist state apparatus doesn't think that Donald Trump is trustworthy. And it's not a matter of Trump being a good guy or a bad guy. It's a matter of they don't think Trump is trustworthy to be at the center of American imperialism.
Well, he's not as controllable as others because he has, a level of independence that other politicians just don't have. I mean, he's not a career politician. So he has this wild card aspect about him.
Indeed. And that is what makes this whole race interesting. Now, the second chapter of the book, I talk about her father and her estrangement from her father, and I get into all of that and the psychology behind it.
This is interesting because I'm been very intrigued by the breakdown of the family and how it impacts people. And not only that, but, especially you mentioned her idolizing her mother and over-identifying with her mother and, having this strange, non-existent relationship with her father. And I mean, that's a lot of people have that. A lot of people have that and identify with it. They're, totally, they'll idolize their mothers. They'll never see, how their mothers contributed to situations between their fathers. When the marriage breaks down, it's always the father's fault, not the mother's. And, they kind of take on their mother's spirit in a way. So I find this interesting because I do find conservatives often bring up her father being a Marxist, but it doesn't sound like she was that influenced by him. So no. I'm curious about her mother's politics as well.
Well, her mother was a cancer researcher. And the other thing I want to mention, so the second chapter, I mean, this is what you said about the relationships and all of that. You don't know how right you are. I begin the second chapter by talking about the previous 4 presidents. I talk about their personalities, and I I specifically highlight it in terms of their relationship with their parents, because this is, Freud talks about what he calls transference. When you're a child, your relationship with your parents is the most important relationship that you have. When you're a small baby, you would die without your parents feeding you and supporting you, right? And as you go through life, aspects of that relationship can be transferred throughout life, and that's like a Freudian conception, transference. And so it's interesting to notice that our last four presidents, there's certain overlaps in their personalities. Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, neither of them knew their fathers, right? They were raised by single mothers who married stepfathers.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, interesting.
And both of the stepfathers beat their mothers, and they then left the abusive stepfathers after a prolonged period of domestic violence, and they stayed with their mother and their son. Both of them, grew up kind of being there for their mom on a rainy day, right? They were the little boy cheering up their mom, etc. They learned at a young age. They were both very articulate and good speakers. And they both ended up going to Ivy League schools, and where they were kind of selected to be part of the American political elite. And that's very interesting. And what's interesting is that both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, their speaking had an interesting quality to it. They were big on hope, right? Bill Clinton said, "I came from a little place called Hope, Arkansas." That was Bill Clinton's thing. Barack Obama. Yeah, and Barack Obama was hope and change, right? And that both of them seemed very radical, as long as you did not pay attention to what they were actually saying. They were the masters of radicalism in tone, but not in content. Their words would just be standard American political words. In Bill Clinton's case, he was actually moving the Democratic Party economically to the right, making the Democratic Party much more economically free market, neoliberal oriented.
Yes, so much of the reform of welfare and just NAFTA, all the things that happened in the 90s that kind of Republicans probably wouldn't have been able to get it as done like, the Clintons did. And I just kind of thought while you were speaking about the two of them, they also both have these very kind of domineering wives. And I don't say that to diminish them, but it is interesting. And you do see that with men who kind of identify with their mothers. They tend to gravitate towards women who are more, dominant. Let's just say.
And in Bill Clinton's situation, we also know Bill Clinton, he's not exactly faithful to his wife, and that there's a lot of, and that they talk about with Bill Clinton, they talk about the Madonna whore complex, where it's like, a woman.
I doubt he sees Hillary as a Madonna, though.
And then with Obama, he obviously is married to Michelle, but many people, it's been widely understood that, and he admits in his autobiography that at least before he was married, he had homosexual proclivities. That's known, right? So, in both of their cases, you can speculate about that. I don't get into that part in the book, but so I just talked about the overlap between Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. Donald Trump and George W. Bush, there's also an interesting overlap. Now, George W. Bush and Donald Trump are both the son of very high-achieving fathers, but they are the failed son of high-achieving fathers, right? George Herbert Walker Bush was the head of the CIA and vice president, and George W. Bush was the screw-up son with a drinking problem who got awful grades in school and got arrested at football games for rowdy, drunken behavior and had a problem with cocaine and started a series of business ventures that didn't take off. And his mother even said when he became president, "I always thought Jeb Bush had potential, but I never thought George W. had potential," right? George W. Bush had something to prove. And Donald Trump is a very similar story. Donald Trump was the son of Fred Trump. Fred Trump was a very effective real estate, businessman in New York City. And Donald Trump has many siblings, but Donald Trump was the one who was such a problem child. He was sent to military boarding school because he was such a, discipline problem in the household. Donald Trump was then, throughout his 20s, he was a party boy. He talks about how getting venereal disease was his own personal Vietnam. And he was going to parties and drinking and doing all kinds of wild things. And then Donald Trump then has something to prove, because he then goes into business, and he is the most, his whole family, they own real estate, they do business, they're a wealthy family. But Donald Trump wants to get his name in the headlines. Donald Trump wants everyone to know what a success, how important he is, how rich he is. In the 80s and the 90s, he becomes America's most well-known millionaire, right? And that is Donald Trump. And both George W. Bush and Donald Trump, they have something to prove. Now, they knew their fathers, but there's damage there. They were the bad son. Their fathers didn't approve of them. Their fathers didn't like them. They were compared to other siblings in a negative way. So they both have damage. And, Terry, you and I, people probably don't care about our personality. Maybe our friends do. But the president of the United States is pretty important, because the decisions that they make, that has a huge impact on what could happen. And we saw that with Barack Obama. When it came to Libya, for example, right? Barack Obama did not want to go into Libya. And he actually said when he was leaving office, his biggest regret as president was going into Libya without a clear plan. And we now know from the autobiography or the memoir of Ben Rhodes, who worked in the White House, we know how Barack Obama was convinced to intervene in Libya, which is that they told him that, when Gaddafi retook the city of Benghazi, he was going to go house to house, is what they said. And that's a quote from Gaddafi. He said, "We will go house to house." And they told Barack Obama that meant Gaddafi was going to kill every person in Benghazi. That's not what Gaddafi meant. Gaddafi meant we're going to find the terrorists. We're going to search the place. We're going to find who the terrorists are. But they worked on Barack Obama for 3 days. Gaddafi is going to retake Benghazi. He's going to go house to house. He's going to kill everyone. And you, Barack, will be remembered as the president who didn't stop a genocide in Africa, right? The first black president didn't stop a genocide in Africa. And if you think that the damage that little Barack had watching his mother get beaten by Lolo Soetoro, with nothing he could do about it because he was a child, if you think that damage didn't have an impact on him ultimately giving in and going into Libya, you're wrong. It absolutely did. They knew his personality. They knew how to push his buttons, and it took them a while. It took them 3 days, but they finally got him to go in. And that is important. And what happened as a result of the war in Libya is that, the most prosperous African country has been reduced to rubble. 2011 was a long time ago, but yet that country has not recovered. People are drowning in the Mediterranean. There's open-air slave markets. The electricity in much of the country hasn't been restored. I mean, it was a disaster, a humanitarian disaster, what was done in Libya. And the regime change forces, they managed to get it done by knowing how to push somebody's buttons, by knowing how to get under somebody's skin. So then that leads me to what you were talking about before, about this aspect of Kamala Harris, loving the mother, not liking the father. Because if you look at the Hillary Clinton wing of American politics, you will see this story over and over and over again, right? Samantha Power, who worked in the White House, was one of the people working with Ben Rhodes to convince Obama to bomb Libya. She was born in Ireland, and her father was an alcoholic who beat up her mother. And her mother left her alcoholic father and took her to the United States. Her alcoholic father died a year or so later from alcohol poisoning. And she rose up American politics by being an advocate of military interventions. And she wrote the book Problem from Hell, making the case for Bill Clinton to bomb the former Yugoslavia. And she was a military intervention propagandist first, and then she eventually got into politics. She was Obama's UN ambassador. She worked in the Hillary Clinton State Department. That's her story. Amy Klobuchar is another similar story, right? Amy Klobuchar's father was an alcoholic who beat her mother, and the mother separated. She was raised by her mother. She did not speak to her father until she was in her mid-20s when he got into AA and got into recovery, and she forgave him or whatever. And she rose up the ranks of politics as also being a vicious prosecutor, much like Kamala Harris. And Amy Klobuchar's trademark when she was a prosecutor was that a black man would be on trial. This is the 90s when the rate of mass incarceration is going up. The talk of super predators is everywhere.
Yes.
Yes, her trademark was she would use these gang experts. So, I mean, the first thing you have to remember is that in America, nobody goes to trial. Like, very rarely does anyone go to trial because it's very expensive. It takes almost 2 years, and you know, and I mean, you just don't. People make plea deals. Like 95% of cases don't go to trial. So if somebody goes to trial, right? There's a good chance that they're innocent or something's off. Like in California, they have a 3-strike law where your third felony, you're going to prison for 25 years. So your third strike, you're going to go to trial. Rich people go to trial because they're rich enough, they can afford it, right? But generally, if somebody actually takes the risk and the expense of having a jury trial, there's a very good chance that they're innocent, or else why would they put themselves through that? Why would they not just take a plea deal? Because prosecutors do everything they can to avoid jury trials. But Amy Klobuchar was a trial lawyer, and her trademark was there would be a black man on trial for some crime, arguing that he was innocent, and she would bring in what she called a gang expert, which is a witness, an expert witness who knew nothing about the actual crime in the case, but was just an expert on all the awful things that gangs do. And he would get on the stand and testify and tell the jury horror stories about all the awful things that gangs do. I mean, you can imagine. And
yes,
the jurors,
they do horrible things. It's true.
They absolutely do. And jurors would sit there and they would hear this, and and then they would think the message subtly was, okay, if we acquit this guy and he gets out, he might do something like this again. And that was very effective in helping convict black men who were on trial. That was Amy Klobuchar's trademark. And, she's somebody else who wants to present herself as a progressive and a Black Lives Matter figure. But Kamala Harris, she rose up the ranks of California's criminal justice system as a prosecutor. And her behavior as prosecutor is shockingly immoral. In 2010, there was the drug lab scandal, where people were testing positive for using drugs when they did not use drugs. There was a drug lab that was turning over false positive results, and her office did not tell defendants' attorneys about this. And so over 1,000 cases were dismissed in California, and the courts ruled that she had violated the rights of hundreds of people. People were let out of prison. People were serving prison sentences, and they were released because it was revealed that she had covered up that the drug labs were turning over false positives. Now, you want to talk about a situation where you're indifferent to other people's suffering. I mean, that's a pretty intense thing where you're concealing that drug test results are not correct. That's intense. 2004, she was the attorney general in California, and a man named Kevin Cooper was hours away from getting lethal injection. Death by lethal injection. And the governor of California, he didn't want to have blood on his hands of an innocent man, so he asked that they acquire DNA evidence. And Kamala's office stepped in and said, "It's not necessary. We know he did it. Just go ahead with it." And they fought against acquiring DNA evidence. Well, they were overruled. DNA evidence was acquired, and the execution was stopped.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, now that right there is huge. She tells the New York Times that she feels awful about it. She feels awful about it. Well, that's
but she didn't feel awful at the time to give someone the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, she does seem to have a vicious kind of. I don't even know that it's vicious, but yeah, there's something off.
Well, it's that
especially to be a progressive sort of, identity politics sort of person. They're portrayed as so, kind or something. I'm just, this is interesting stuff.
Oh, but it goes beyond that. 2013, she's invited to speak to the Chicago Ideas Forum. And she had to give a speech about what it's like to be a prosecutor or whatever. And she begins her speech by marching around the stage in this sarcastic, mocking voice going, "Build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails." Yeah. And she just is mocking protesters, right? Who say, "Build more schools, less jails." Right. And she begins her speech with this angry rant against protesters, making fun of them, how annoying they are, and And after she marches around the stage in this mocking voice saying, build more schools, less jails, he said, well, yeah, that sounds great, but you haven't explained why I have to have 5 padlocks on my door, right? You know, and again, like, she's trying to present herself as the electoral incarnation of Black Lives Matter right now, when, you know, she was clearly speaking with utter contempt for such people. And there's many examples of this. Reason Magazine has done an astoundingly good job, you know, just going over her career as a prosecutor and how she has violated people's rights. And it's particularly wild. Another thing that's worth pointing out, when she was in 2014, after she was reelected as California State Attorney General, she argued on 2 occasions, at least, against releasing somebody. Someone was up for being released, and argued against releasing them on the grounds that it would cost too much money for the taxpayers to not have their cheap labor. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. And
interesting. So all these people that, you know, were Black Lives Matter, defund the police, are now going to get railroaded into supporting her.
Yeah, she actually argued on at least 2 occasions. Someone was up for release, and her office argued, well, if we release them, we won't have their cheap labor. We won't have access to their cheap labor, because in California, prisoners get paid 8 to 37 cents an hour to do labor, like being a firefighter, like picking up garbage along the highway, etc. And that's an austerity program, you know, because, you know, prisoners, you don't have to pay the minimum wage. But, you know, if the state hires, you know, a regular, you know, law-abiding citizen, they get union benefits, union representation, they get benefits, they get decent wages. And that prison labor, I mean, you know, it's not just exporting jobs to other countries, it's exporting them to prisons, you know. A lot of times, if you're dealing with a customer service person, you know, a lot of the prisons, the federal prisons around the country, have call centers in them where prisoners spend their days answering people's phone calls. I believe there's military aircraft that are made by prisoners, you know, at this point. I think Victoria's Secret had prisoners making women's underwear at one point.
I heard about this too. Yes.
Yeah, and this is an ongoing issue, and it's certainly something that Kamala Harris, you know, when she's making that kind of callous argument for keeping people locked up, that, oh, we can keep them locked up to save money, that at some point that's just, you know, she is not what she presents herself to be. She wants to be this image of a woke activist. And there's many instances where she's been caught just blatantly lying. There was at one point, you know, she tells the story. There's a story of, like, her mother asking her, what is it that you want? And she said, I want freedom, or something like that. And it's actually a quote from a Dr. Martin Luther King book. It's just plagiarized from one of Dr. Martin Luther King's books. And there are other instances like that where she's been caught just kind of lying. She wants to be this liberal activist candidate. Her parents certainly were communists when they met, but she has spent her life as a very vengeful person with indifference to other people's suffering. I maintain that it is her feelings of victimhood, her feelings of anger at her father, and her feelings that she's a victim that gives her license to do all the evil things that she has done.
Indeed. You know, people who have these unresolved psychological issues do nothing but, you know, inflict their hatefulness and their just anger out onto the world, regardless of what station they end up in. And so it is very concerning when you see that someone really hasn't resolved these issues.
Yes,
and to
indeed.
Consider, you know, and then I think too, I mean, women in a position of leadership as well, there's just so many, well, I don't know how to put this exactly, but I think that women leaders are a bit rarer than male ones for a number of reasons. It takes an exceptional woman to lead.
Yeah.
Because she has to incur the respect of men as well. And, you know, they have to believe in her. And it's hard to make women do that, really, or hard for women to make that happen. To command that kind of authority as an individual. So I am, yeah, I just hearing this and kind of putting this together, I am deeply concerned that she's so popular and that she does seem to be kind of leading the Democrats right now, and that she is in the position of power that she is anyway. I mean, even her as vice president is concerning.
Well, and what I also talk about in the book is that Biden did everything he could to not pick her as his running mate.
Interesting.
You'll recall, Biden announced that he would be picking a VP candidate, and it would be a woman of color. The media all just started announcing it would be Kamala Harris, and he said,
Why is that so important to people? Like, really, it doesn't matter.
Well,
I mean, I'm just going to put that out there. Like, really.
And so then,
what happened to the best person for the job? Why does it have it's just so condescending as well. Like, here you go, women and people of color. Here's your, or let's just put a woman of color in it. It's like, is she qualified? Is she the best candidate? Is she going to be the best for the country? What happened to that? Like, if she's great, yeah, put her in, but come on.
Well, and so then after they announced it would be a woman of color, the media is screaming it should be Kamala, and the Biden campaign always says, no, we have not decided on who it will be. We didn't say that. We have not decided. So then they announce a date that Biden's going to pick his VP by, and that date comes and goes, no VP. And then it's 10 days after that date. And during that 10 days, everyone's wondering why Biden hasn't picked his VP. And so suddenly the name Karen Bass gets floated. Now, Karen Bass is now the mayor of Los Angeles.
I know about Karen Bass.
Oh,
she's a mess too.
Well, anyway, Karen Bass gets floated. And then the New York Times suddenly discovered that she went to Cuba when she was a young person. She was on the Vince Ramos brigades. Now, who might keep track of that and who was sitting on that all this time? I don't know. Who gave that information to the New York Times? It's rather interesting, but, well, it can't be Karen Bass because she went to Cuba. End of story. Boom, right? So then they're talking about maybe Susan Rice. So then the schedule of the Democratic National Convention gets published. Kamala Harris is listed as a speaker separate from the VP nominee. And that schedule is everywhere. And everyone's like, whoa, it's not Kamala. It's not Kamala because, she's separate. And then Kamala Harris unfollowed Joe Biden on Twitter.
Is this in your book?
It
All
is.
Of these juicy details? Oh, my goodness.
And then 6 hours after she unfollowed Joe on Twitter, Joe announced she was the VP.
Now, okay. Wow.
So we know something went on in the back room, and that there were a lot of arms twisted. There were a lot of threats made. The other thing to keep in mind is, Tara Reid is a friend of mine,
yes.
the woman that was sexually assaulted by Joe Biden. When she first came out with her allegation, along with a number of other women, Kamala Harris said she believed them. Right. Mm-hmm. And Tara Reid, has confirmed that Kamala Harris's staff was in touch with her. And Kamala Harris said she believed them. And to this day, Kamala Harris has never recanted that she believed the women who accused Joe Biden. And what's also interesting is, a few days after this whole drama, when the Democratic National Convention happened, and I guess she was the nominee after all, I guess it was just a typo on the schedule or what was going on there. In her speech, and you'll remember this was pandemic times, there wasn't a big crowd there. They start out with a big video all about her childhood and all of this. And then after they show the video all about, what a great child she was and all of this, then Kamala gets up and she gives her speech. In her speech, she's talking about, what she's going to do as VP and all of that. And then she gets to a line in her speech where she says, I know a predator when I see one. And if you read the speech, it sounds like she's talking about Donald Trump. But when you listen to it, she says, I know a predator when I see one. And then there's this awkward pause. Like there's this space in the air. Like, she's throwing that out there. Like, she knows something. She's not afraid to say something. Now, Seymour Hersh just revealed yesterday that apparently Kamala threatened Joe Biden with the 25th Amendment in order to get him to drop out of the race. That is Seymour Hersh's big reveal. He has intelligence sources and others who leaked to him that Kamala did, and she got the rest of the cabinet to come forward and say, look, Joe, if you don't drop out of the race, we will declare you, psychologically unfit for office. We'll declare you have Alzheimer's or whatever. That's what Seymour Hersh is saying. So at this point, I mean, Kamala Harris, she fights dirty. She fights dirty. Let me just put it that way. We don't know exactly the details of how she fights dirty, but if you look over this, you get a pattern of, and since I wrote the book, a lot more has been revealed about her staff, her office. The reason people can't continue working for her and they just keep quitting in droves, people just can't keep working for her in her office, is because working for her kind of ends your career on Capitol Hill, because you are then known as a Harris person, and Harris people are notoriously toxic. They are known for being very, very hard to deal with, etc. The other thing is that Kamala Harris does not, she does not do prep for interviews very well. And her interviews haven't gone so well, if you've noticed, but it's always the staff's fault. And that she's known to single people out in staff meetings and shame them in front of everyone and yell at them. There's a pretty toxic atmosphere in her office. And there was a White House whistleblower, someone on the tech team of the White House who spoke to James O'Keefe, and he said she can't keep black staff. That was the word he used. She can't keep black staff. You don't want to work for Kamala Harris. And so, I mean, at this point, I mean, we're seeing somebody who is, they're not only unwell psychologically, they're not only, basically have no ethical qualms about harming other people, but they also maintain a very toxic atmosphere in their office. And they seem to use very, I don't know what the right word would be, combative, hostile, competitive methods in order to get ahead.
Ruthless, cunning, ruthless, very,
Yeah. I mean, we're dealing with somebody here who just, the more you look into who she really is, the more you think this woman shouldn't be president. I mean, it's like, I'm not against a woman of color being president, but it shouldn't be her, and honestly, I wish her well. I think that, she has had a hard life. That for someone to be like she is, some awful things had to have happened to her, right? Her father drops a couple hints in the essay, but we don't know. He never really fully says it. And in addition to that, she spent her teen years in Quebec, and she never talks about what happened in Quebec. There's a big gap in her life story. She talks about her childhood in Oakland, and she talks about graduating from high school. Big gap when she lived in Quebec for 3 or 4 years. And that was her teen years. I've heard rumors about what happened to her when she was a teenager in Quebec. I'm not going to repeat those rumors because I can't confirm them. But it is weird that, her teen years were spent in Canada and she says nothing about it. That's weird. And I have no doubt in my mind that some very awful things probably happened to Kamala Harris in her childhood and teen years. I don't know what they were. I do know that in her mind, it is probably Donald Harris's fault, in her mind, at least. She blames Donald Harris for it. I think if one reads the essay Donald Harris wrote, there are little hints about what it might be. I mean, he talks about a reel of film that he has of Kamala Harris and her sister, one of the last times he ever saw them, when he took them to Jamaica, and how they were like in the countryside and how she ran up a hill and how, she was running ahead. And I mean, there's a lot in the essay. So go and read the essay. But,
I'm wondering, is the essay in your book as well?
Well, there's quotations from it. Okay. Yeah, the actual essay, you can find it online, just Reflections of a Jamaican.
Yeah, I'm interested. I haven't read it.
Yeah, and she, I mean, there's some awful things happened to her. She blames Donald Harris for that, and I can sympathize with her on that ground. I don't think that we should belittle whatever happened to her. I mean, obviously, for her to develop the narcissistic personality that she has, to have the vengefulness and the rage that she has, to have the extreme victim complex that she has, there has to have been some very serious problems.
And the childishness as well is very common amongst narcissists. I use the term narcissism, and I just kind of put that together. Her over-identification with herself as a girl.
Yeah.
Being, I don't know how old she is. I assume she's in her 50s.
She's over 50. It's not polite to talk about a woman's age.
Mature grown woman,
Yeah. And
so
for her,
very interesting.
Yeah, for somebody well over 50 years old, for her to talk about her childhood the way she does is really bizarre. I don't wish her any harm. I don't wish her any ill will. I think she should retire and, get a nice place on the beach in California, go around speaking to universities, giving empowering speeches about women of color. You can be vice president too. I think she's got a great life ahead of her. You know what I mean? But I don't think she should be president. Right? I don't think that what I'm describing, the personality that I'm describing here, with the record as a prosecutor that I'm describing, with the baggage, I don't think she should be president of the United States. And I have felt that way ever since I started researching her, ever since I found out that her father was a communist. I started researching her. And I must say that, for me, writing this book was a spiritual journey, because you and I mean, we met, we were both in communist groups, I think, at the time that we met, but we both kind of evolved and changed since then. And, I spent a lot of time wondering what went wrong. What was wrong with the far left? Like what happened? And this book very much reflected my own spiritual journey, trying to wrangle with, where do we go from here? And what does it mean to be an anti-imperialist and a socialist in this time, and all of that. And that Kamala Harris' life raises much bigger questions. Much bigger questions than just about herself. It's about my 3-part essay is about politics in our time, and one of the points that I continue to come back to is that socialism has 2 souls within it, and one soul of socialism is the spirit of rebellion. The desire for vengeance, the desire to rise up and destroy. That is a big aspect of socialism. And the red flag, left and right goes back to the French Revolution. During the French Revolution, they created a national assembly, and the people who were still loyal to the king sat on the right, and the radicals, the innovators, they called themselves, they sat on the left. And the Jacobins were famous for their red caps that they wore. And then eventually the red flag became the symbol of revolution. In the 1848 Spring of Nations, that included the German Revolution, the red flag became the symbol of revolution. And what is red the color of? Red is the color of anger and rage, and it's also the color of sexual passion. There's a reason that bullfighters wave red to taunt the bull, right? And that the French Revolution and the uprisings to bring down feudalism were largely libidinal explosions. In feudalism, a peasant can't look at a king or landowner in the face, right? Everyone kind of knows their place and is just kind of living in a very structured way. And of course, sexual behavior is very, very closely regulated. People can get the death penalty for adultery, etc. In France, there was a particularly degrading ritual called prima nocta. Have you ever heard of this? That went on in France.
First night.
Yeah, basically, if a peasant got married, the local noble would have sexual rights to the wife before the peasant did, just as it was intended to be a way to humiliate the peasant man and put him in his place, right? And this was practiced in France. It was part of French feudalism, and there were all kinds of very degrading ways people were treated in French society, and people were also being forced to hold in their sexual desires and being humiliated in sexual ways and all of that. And the French Revolution was largely the rich and powerful people, the new capitalist class, saying, let it all out, just unleash all the rage and impulses. And, they got rid of the Catholic Church, and they called it they replaced it with what they called the cult of the supreme being. They changed the Cathedral of Notre Dame to a temple of reason and science. And they gave people permission to unleash their rage. And one of the most important people in the French Revolution was the Marquis de Sade, who was a pornographic writer and, a rapist, really. He was a rapist and a molester of women who'd been put into a mental hospital. And at the time,
he was no hero.
Not at all. And he was, And he was released from prison, and he wrote all kinds of pamphlets and urging the French Revolution to keep going. As the French Revolution is dying down, he's trying to figure out how to keep the revolution going. He writes a pamphlet urging the abolition of God, because he says God is holding back people's revolutionary impulses. And it's a very odd way to argue, because atheists don't generally make that kind of argument. It's like, does God exist or not? But it's like, well, God holds back people's ability to keep the French Revolution going. I think the essay is called something like Frenchman, here's one further step, or something like that. Like, we can abolish God in order to keep the revolution going. He also argues that in order to keep the revolutionary energy of the population going, that they should have theaters with naked women in them, that men can just walk into and look at the naked women, and then they'll be aroused and passionate, and then the revolutionary energy will keep going. And so, so the color red and libidinal release and unleashing rage and violence along with sexual release, that's what a lot of what it means to be a leftist, so to speak. The left aesthetic is rooted in that, okay? That's one side of socialism, because the socialist movement emerged in the aftermath of the French Revolution, when people were seeing that we didn't get an egalitarian society. Liberté, égalité, fraternity. The bourgeois revolution did not create a just and equal society, and they want to keep the anger of the poor, the sans culottes, right, those without shoes, going to tear down injustice, right? Have people keep unleashing their rage, keep unleashing their impulses. Chaos, right? There's a poem by William Blake, the English poet, who led an uprising in, I believe, in 1848, if I'm not mistaken. In Britain, there was some kind of Protestant uprising, and he said, or maybe it was a Catholic uprising, I don't even remember, but he said, in his poem, he says, "I shall not cease from mental strife, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." Meaning, we're just going to keep killing, we're going to keep tearing things down, we're going to keep being full of anger until we have created heaven on earth, right? And that was the bourgeois capitalist revolution, which kind of laid the basis for socialism, which came afterwards, which was pointing to the failure to achieve its stated goals, the failure to create the equality and justice. So that's one side of socialism. However, socialist economics generally strives for something very, very different. Socialist economics is about creating stability, right? Marx talks about the anarchy of capitalism, the anarchy of production, and that, in the Soviet Union, immediately after the Russian Revolution, they tried to do the whole free love thing, right? There's, Anastasia Kollontai, and there's the infamous glass of water theory, where Lenin said that having sex would be as meaningless as drinking a glass of water after the revolution. Lenin didn't say that, but other Bolsheviks were saying it. And there was this wave of sexual liberation. And the peasantry that is deeply, deeply conservative in Russia was not having it. They did not want anything to do with it. They were deeply conservative. And Stalin, when he came to power, Trotsky called it the thermidor in the family, because Stalin outlawed abortion, Stalin outlawed homosexuality, and he began glorifying the Soviet family, which was a precursor to what we had in the 50s in America, the nuclear family.
Right. Yes, it is interesting that, you have these cultural things taking place in the Soviet Union, and then after World War II, in the U.S., there are these similar parallels with how, like you mentioned, the nuclear family. It is very similar, the glorification, the kind of propaganda around it, and it really impacts our society now as well.
Yeah, but the point is that the Soviet Union became conservative out of necessity, right? Yeah. The peasantry, and the Soviet Union was very much, it was a synthesis. You had the very, very radical Bolsheviks with their left-wing Marxist, views, and then you also had the deeply, deeply conservative and traditional peasantry. And the brilliance of Stalin was that the Soviet state, really existing socialism, Stalinism, 20th century communism, whatever you want to call it, is this weird hybrid of both, right? It is women are getting education, women are working alongside men, women are leaders of the military, but homosexuality is illegal, but women get medals for having 10 children, but abortion is frowned on, and the state is trying to increase the population as much as possible. And it is this kind of merger of deeply traditional conservative things about Russian civilization with the very, very modern ideas of the Bolsheviks. It's this like compromise, right? And that in a lot of ways, Stalin is the new czar, right? And Lenin, one of the first things that Stalin does as he's rising into power is he puts Lenin's body in a mausoleum. And he has people come and look at Lenin's body. And that one of the beliefs of the Russian Orthodox Church is that a saint's body does not decompose at the same rate that a normal person's body decomposes. So he puts Lenin's body, preserves it in a mausoleum, and then he puts this image of Lenin everywhere, where Lenin almost has a halo around his head, like he's a saint, right? It looks a lot like an Orthodox icon. And so the picture of Lenin is everywhere. And, you know, the ideology of the Soviet state is Marxism-Leninism. People are looking at the statue or the image of Lenin and pledging to live their life like Lenin, to continue the tradition of Lenin, right? And these are deeply conservative Orthodox traditions that he's kind of modernizing and putting a communist dialectical spin on. It's kind of brilliant what Stalin is doing. And then Stalin, right, he's mobilizing the country to industrialize. And Stalin is going around, and what Stalin basically did for a living is he was a guy who handed out awards every day, right? He just went from city to city giving people awards for how hard they worked. Yeah, you know, and if you were in a factory and you were a basket weaver, or you were a farmer, or you were a coal miner, and you worked harder than everybody else, Stalin came to your factory one day, and there was a big ceremony where he put a medal on you, and you got a big cash bonus, and it was, you know, and that was what he did. He was the good father, or the good king that everyone wanted to please, right? Everyone looked up to Stalin, right? And this was kind of like the role that the Tsar played. You can almost imagine that it's almost like a corporation. The Soviet Union became a giant corporation that's trying to maximize its profits, and Stalin was the CEO, and every employee was a shareholder, right? I mean, and like that's kind of what really existing socialism was, and it was a very effective model for industrializing countries, and this was copied. Mao did the same thing. Kim Il-sung, all over Eastern Europe, you know, Ceausescu and Enver Hoxha, and this Erich Honecker. I mean, this became a very effective model for industrializing a country. Is you have this, you know, kind of one-party state where, you know, they preside over a centrally planned economy. Women are empowered, and the population is mobilized to industrialize. And you have a very charismatic leader at the center whose picture is everywhere, who's going around handing out awards all the time. It's a very effective model for industrializing a country. But it has nothing to do with, it's not left wing. It's not the French Revolution, right? It's not libidinal release at all. If anything, it is it's transference. It's parental transference.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, he's your father, right? And the state, it's appealing to people's, you know, desire for a parental figure who cares about them, et cetera. So it's a completely different thing, and it's quite conservative. It's emphasizing loyalty to the country, traditional values, right? You know, work very hard. The military is a big part of it, you know, but that's part of socialism as well. And in fact, if you look at when it is that communists actually take power, they tend to take power on the promise of stability. You know, the Bolshevik Revolution, the promise was peace, land, and bread. That was the promise, right? And during the Great Depression in the United States, when the Communist Party was very large, the only time the Communist Party really had a huge amount of influence in America was the 1930s. 1932, their campaign slogan was the revolutionary way out of the crisis, i.e. we will end the chaos, right? And then
they always promise stability.
Yeah, and then 1940, the presidential campaign, they shorten it. It's The Way Out is the name of Earl Browder's 1940 presidential campaign book. He says, The Way Out. The message is capitalism is making your life unstable with unemployment, with the danger of war and all of this. We will bring in stability. And communists offer a program. I think the Communist Party USA had a 10-point program, and it was 10 things that were very achievable under capitalism that would challenge the power of the big banks and corporations, but would stabilize the economy. Right. And they're not, you know, the message of the new left is very, very different. The new left is going around saying, you know, there's an apocalypse coming, there's chaos, and we're going to burn down. That's not what the Communist Party was saying. The Communist Party was going around saying your life is chaotic because of this system. And if we come to power, we will bring stability. And if you look at the Soviet Union, they're a very poor country, but they're having huge amounts of economic growth now because they've centrally planned their economy and organized it. And that's what we want to bring here. And it's a completely different thing. Right. And so this is basically what the book is getting at, is that there are two sides of what it means to be a socialist, and that Kamala Harris is the ultimate expression of the dark, evil side of socialism, of that middle class desire for vengeance, that revolutionary intelligentsia, that libidinal release. Kamala Harris isn't a socialist in any way. She's identity politics. She sees herself as a victim. She wants revenge. And, that's Kamala Harris. Whereas, if you look around the world, the communist movement of today is quite conservative. And, Vietnam with their
Indeed,
social, and China, and that there is an anti-imperialist bloc, but it is quite conservative, and it's taken that productive side of socialism. Let's pull together and build up our country.
I find that interesting too. Just a segue, I have a lot of conservative people that watch my channel as well, and I'm conservative in a lot of regards, just personally, or right-wing people per se. But it's come up in the past about how similar I find communists, traditional communists, to be to them, and they're used to dealing with, I think, the kind of left wing as we have it now in America. But for most of the actual communists, and especially when I've met communists who are from communist countries, like when I've actually met Chinese communists or people who lived in Russia, they're far more conservative traditionally, and they have more traditional values than an American leftist would. So it's interesting that there's this disconnect between, but I think that's intentional. I mean, there was a time when, there was this sense of an international, and that kind of was destroyed for multiple reasons. But, there was a sense that there was, we were looking towards these countries for maybe support, inspiration, a way forward. And that kind of was completely disconnected in the 60s. And even
that's what the New Left was about. It was breaking that link between communist countries and Western Marxist and leftist movements. It was about breaking that link. I mean, that's what the Congress for Cultural Freedom was very blatantly stated. That was the intent. They wanted to break apart that link. But
I'm thinking about Trotskyist groups as well, because I was involved with a group that had a Trotskyist lineage, and they were very distraught by the conservatization. Is that the right word? But the conservatism of Stalin, and how the Soviet Union kind of rolled back some of the social liberalism that the Bolsheviks first introduced. So it's just, as you were bringing that up, it kind of put that together, that interesting piece that even though this was good for society overall, I mean, that kind of living isn't sustainable. It doesn't lead to life, to be isolated and to be promiscuous and to be not building families and not focused on working and doing what's in front of us to do. It's very, to me, it seems very antithetical to building a society at all.
Well, and I feel like right now, social media is very much trying to keep people frozen in an adolescent stage. And that's a very big aspect of social media, right? When you're an adolescent, you want to rebel, and all of that, but it's kind of keeping people from growing up to some degree or other. For me, I just think about moving to New York City. I mean, I knew you before I moved to New York City. We were both making videos on YouTube. I was in Cleveland. You were out where you are. But then I moved to New York City, and, two experiences stand out. One is the first, or I guess the second job I had in New York City before I became, a full-time, correspondent, or a full-time, spokesperson for Ramsey Clark and the International Action Center. Before I did that, I worked at an insurance company, and the insurance company was owned by Hasidic Jews. And I worked at the insurance company, and there were two types of employees there, largely. There were very religious Hasidic Jews, and then there were very liberal folks who, just were part of the New York City culture. And I realized I got along better with the Hasidic religious Jews than I did with the normal liberal young people, because they had their books about Hasidic Judaism and about religion, and I had my books about communism. And I was interested in ideas, and they were interested in ideas, and I was interested in history, and they were interested in history. I believed in things. And when I talked to them, of course, we didn't always agree, but we could talk, whereas when I would talk to the more like liberal young people, like all they're talking about is what happened at the bar last night, or, who looked fat in their Facebook picture the other day or whatever. And it's just like, I could have real conversations with the very conservative Orthodox Jews I worked with. I could not have real conversations with the younger and not religious folks who work there. And I thought that was interesting. But the day that really sticks with me is the day Gaddafi died. October 20th, I was in the Occupy Wall Street Park when the news of Gaddafi's death came out. And there was a real gap because the people who were happy that Gaddafi was dead were the trust fund kids who worked at NGOs and liberals, and the Trotskyites and others. And the people that were not happy about it were people like me that came to New York City, came to Occupy Wall Street on a Greyhound bus or whatever, didn't have very much, and they tended to be libertarian and Alex Jones fans and into conspiracy theories, but they looked up to Gaddafi because he tried to create an independent African currency, etc. And they saw him as opposing, the Federal Reserve and the big banks, and they listened to Alex Jones. Alex Jones had supported Gaddafi, right? So I had more in common with these young libertarians than I did with the so-called communists, right? And the other thing was I was interested in communism because of economics. And I was always telling the communist group I was in, we need to argue against libertarianism because it's very popular. And their response was, no, it's not that important. And we don't want to, people that would be attracted to those ideas, they're racist, they're backward anyway, so we don't want to recruit them. And they were desperate to try and recruit these like trust fund liberal kids because, they are interested in, racism and people of color and transgender and they're so great. And it's like, none of them are going to join a group that supports North Korea. Right. So, they're not going to do that. Whereas a lot of these younger people that were from working class backgrounds like mine, they were attracted to libertarianism because they believed in the economic mumbo jumbo. They believed that, privatizing everything to make the economy better. They really believed that, and they were against the state. They were against the wars. They were against the government that was repressing them. They'd had relatives who were locked up. They had relatives who were in the military. They see the evil things that the U.S. imperialist state does. It affects them, and so their response is to, believe in libertarianism, want to abolish the state, and to lean toward economic theories that promise to create economic growth, but, are just false, right? Whereas the trust fund kids, they believe in degrowth because they want us all to be poor because of the environment and blah, 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 blah. And, they're not interested in all of that. And they, even though they'll say, they can grandstand against the cops about Black Lives Matter or whatever, at the end of the day, they support U.S. foreign policy around the world. They wanted Gaddafi dead. And as long as U.S. foreign policy has a rainbow flag on top of it and the government that's being demonized is accused of violating human rights, they're all for it.
A lot of them are very into policing other people as well, which I find very interesting about it, that they have this kind of anti-police attitude, but they're so quick to be controlling about how other people express themselves. If somebody says something that they don't agree with, then they go on, smear campaigns. They'll contact people's employers, try to get them fired, or other people that associate with them. They'll go through their even social media and contact random people and, just try to basically slander them. So that's been a tactic that's interesting to note the hypocrisy of that you would, be against criminalizing criminal activity, let's just say, but then, you would be so quick to be punitive with other people. There's a real lack of awareness. But anyway.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, I saw a lot when I was in Cleveland, when I would go to court with police brutality victims and all of that. And that was before it was trendy to talk about police brutality. And I saw a lot of awful things that prosecutors and others will do. So I don't want to belittle any of the stuff that Black Lives Matter protested around because I saw it up close and I know it's a reality. That said, though, I do think that much of the
I want to push back though about that a little bit, just to say this, that I think that they made it into a racial issue when it's not just a racial issue. And I think that's purposefully done to divide the population. More white people are killed and violated by police than any other race. So why is it that it's a racial issue and not a class issue?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's convenient to divide people by race. And because they can exploit that racism and foment anger in the Black population. And then white people don't identify with the Black people because look at how they're behaving. They're angry. And they can easily write it off as, oh, this person did this person did that. And not look at the overall problem of the actual issue of police violence. So I think talking about it just in terms of racism is detrimental because it's not a racial issue. It's an issue of, police brutality that affects everyone. Anybody.
It's an issue related to the fact that our state is becoming more and more repressive as living standards drop and society becomes less stable.
That's true. We're all dealing with the effects of that. And I don't know. I'm sure New York I haven't been since 2019. So I don't know. I've heard that it's a lot worse. And even here, it's a lot more, security culture is up, privatized security is everywhere. You have a much more policed environment despite all of the anti-police protests that we went through. It seems society is even though they've defunded the police here, supposedly they seem to be even more present.
Well,
anyway.
But what I was getting to is while I do stand by, seeing the awful things that happen and all of that, I do think that the rhetoric that we employed as leftists against police officers was not helpful.
Does Caleb watch JLP? I don't know.
I
would love
JLP?
To see Caleb on JLP.
Who's JLP?
I picked up a lot of my viewers just from trolling the chat there at the JLP show. He's a Black conservative.
Oh, okay.
I would love to see you on The Fallen State or something, or interviewed by one of them. I should suggest it, or maybe somebody in the chat will. But Caleb would be an amazing guest. I think.
I'm getting Trumper podcast and show invitations like you wouldn't believe right now. So, I'll take it. I'll take it. And I but I do want to, what I was getting to is that I don't think the way we spoke about police officers as leftists was helpful, right? Police have families, right? Police are people. Many people become police because they want to stop child molesters and, criminals and, and that a lot of times we used very dehumanizing and hateful rhetoric toward police officers.
And, we do need people in there that are people who are decent and believe in God and believe in what's right as well, to be a light in these places.
Right. And that these things are complicated and that there's an important aspect of nuance here. I think about, do you know the poem Tommy Adkins by Rudyard Kipling?
No, I know some of his poetry, but go on. I'm sure you have most of it memorized, right?
I mean, some of it. But it's one of my poems that I keep coming back to because it kind of points to the fact that well, anyway, I'll just tell you, it's about a soldier. It's Tommy Adkins is like the nickname of like a British soldier. It's part of like British culture. They talk about Tommy Adkins, the British soldier or whatever. It refers to it's like an anonymous soldier's name, right?
Okay.
And the poem, it starts out, I went into a public house to get a pint of beer. The publican, he up and says, we serve no redcoats here. The girls behind the bar, they laughed and giggled fit to die. And out into the streets, and I don't remember the rest. But anyway, it's basically, he talks about how, because he's wearing his military uniform, he's viewed as a vulgar working class person that society really doesn't care for, right? And that, and if you look at it, he's talking about how, and that, I think he repeats it's Tommy this, it's Tommy that, it's Tommy all the way. But it's thank you, Mr. Adkins, when the band begins to play, and and how they they love soldiers and they love police and they love these kind of people, but they don't really treat them very nicely. They're viewed as vulgar working class people that are not appreciated. And that it points to something much deeper. Rudyard Kipling, basically the theme of his work was that working class people can redeem themselves by being colonizers. That's basically what he's arguing, right? Is that and I don't, but it points to something much deeper, I think, which is that liberalism depends on illiberalism. And that's something that nobody wants to acknowledge, right? Working class life is much more authoritarian than the life of the middle class and the life of the upper class. And that the only way the upper class can enjoy their very free and open liberal life is to have very authoritarian, vulgar working class people like police and soldiers and others, enforcing it, right? And that you cannot have the open free life that the rich enjoy without the authoritarianism that the rich are triggered by, but are fine with as long as it's happening to somebody else, right? And that there's many examples of this that one can go over, but like the military, for example, right? I mean, if you're a working class person, somebody in the military, right? Somebody who's been in prison. Yes. And that, I went to a public school in a small town in Ohio. We had to ask permission to go to the bathroom, God forbid. Well, in the schools of the rich, they don't. They can just get up and go. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. For I, too, am a sorrowful working class, publicly educated girl. So I had to raise my hand and ask.
Yeah.
There were some students that would just get up and go, but they tended to be delinquents.
Right. And then the other thing, my teachers were always Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, Ms., right? Well, I'm sure you're in your public school experience, that's how it was, right? Yes. But, in a lot of the schools of the rich, you're using the first name, because they don't want to be hierarchical, right? I mean, that there are many examples of how it is simply a class question. Authoritarianism is largely a class question, but a lot of this woke left stuff is being triggered by authoritarianism, and it's coming from a place of class privilege. They view Trump, and they view socialist and anti-imperialist countries, and they view working class people who might join a populist movement because they've grown up in an environment where they have not been exposed to the ugly realities of working class life, right? And that they're kind of anti-populism, they're kind of woke. Anti-authoritarianism is very much a reaction to, and it's a reaction to working class people, and it's based on having a class background where one is not exposed to such things in daily life. There's a line in the
very sheltered as well. Yeah, that is a very common thing with them. And I too had trouble integrating into leftist circles. I never did when I was involved, in my youth, because I don't want to say I never did, but I always felt very uncomfortable, unwelcome. Not with everyone, of course, there were other working class people around, but there was a lot of that kind of middle caste attitudes, perspectives, values. They're very into individualism and identity politics and personal, what was the term we used at the time? Lifestyle politics, recycling your way to a better future, riding a bike as opposed to driving a car, being vegan, whatever, all of this nonsense.
Yeah, Rudyard Kipling, in the poem, one of the lines is he says, "And if sometimes our conduct isn't all those fancy paints, well, single men in barracks don't grow into plaster saints." And that kind of captures the essence of what he's getting at. But I know exactly what you mean. One thing that I have noticed, and it took me a long time to figure out what was going on because it just didn't make sense to me, but this is a great example of class difference, right? Is basic courtesy, right? If I'm in the same room as you and someone is talking to me, I'm going to include you in the conversation because you're in the same room, right? And if I'm standing next to you and I'm talking to someone and we're very close to each other, I'm going to include you in the conversation because you're there. You're a person, right? But there were many times where I would be around liberal leftist kind of folks, especially this crowd of people from North Carolina who I had to deal with when I was in the Workers' World Party. They all went to UNC Chapel Hill and UNC Greensboro, and they were very, very obnoxious people. I'll just tell you that much. And you would be in the same room as them, and they'd be having a political conversation, and you would say, because you're like feet away from them, you'd say, "Oh yeah, I heard something about that," and then they would just look over at you and like giggle and just kind of move on with their conversation. And I always wondered what that was. Like, what is that? Well, it took me years to realize in rich people's homes,
you don't speak until you're spoken to.
No,
you have to wait to be introduced in those circles.
Yeah, and the help doesn't get acknowledged. In rich people's homes, there's all these people who are there that you don't acknowledge, right?
Indeed.
Like, you know, there's a maid sweeping the floors, there's a tutor, you know, that you don't have to acknowledge people, right? And that you like, if you choose to acknowledge someone, they exist, right? Well, that's not working class at all. Working class people, you acknowledge the people you're around, right? If you choose not to acknowledge someone, you're kind of dissing them, right?
Indeed, yeah. But I mean, yeah, they have a totally different. There was a book I read about this that was very enlightening. It was a framework for understanding poverty. I can't remember the author right now, but she was a middle class woman who was an educator. She married a working class man. And so she kind of drew on that. And then she also touched on and dealt with kind of the differences between like people from the upper classes as well. And I came away from reading that book with so much insight about behavior. And I understand now, like when you're in certain circles, because there is something about when people have wealth, for example, there's a lot of paranoia and fear so when people just approach you, you're automatically suspicious. You have to wait to be introduced when you're in these circles, because otherwise, you know, they don't know who you are, what you want. You want something from them. You're seen as possible potential like predator or threat. And so I came away from reading that with a whole new insight about maybe some experiences I'd had where I'd maybe misjudged people, thought they were being rude. And it was just I didn't understand their culture and they didn't understand mine.
Yeah.
So definitely
what you're describing is reality.
Yeah, but you know. Anyway, sorry, I went off on that tangent. But
no, that's okay. I talk a lot too, you know, and I got to tell you, your channel is awesome. And many times I tune in and listen to you, and seeing the way you've evolved over the years as I've evolved, and yet we remain connected. You know, it is really, anytime I get to interact with you, Terry, it is an honor and a pleasure. So thank you for everything you do.
Same. What a great conversation today, too.
Oh, yeah. But we don't have to stop here. Do you want to talk about Venezuela?
Oh, yes. Who was it? Dystopian Deep Dives was asking about Venezuela. I know they just had an election and the, I don't know the right-wing candidate, but they're contesting it or something. They're saying that.
Yeah, well, you know, I was in Venezuela in 2015 when they had an election, and it was the only election that wasn't followed by rioting. Why? Because the right wing won. They won control of the parliament that time, so there was no rioting. But yeah, they were anticipating that if the Socialist Party had won, that all the rich neighborhoods would be full of rioting, which is what generally happens every time the rich, the Venezuelan opposition loses. They declare it was a fraud, even though Jimmy Carter was there and said it's the most, fair election system in the world. What's going on now? I actually, though, I want to point out this quotation because this is really, really important. Because I'm sure there are many leftists who support Maduro that don't appreciate him saying this. But he said, quote, "The same system that killed John F. Kennedy and attempted to kill Donald Trump is trying to sow civil strife in Venezuela." That's what he just said in his televised address. And today they had a national mobilization of marches for peace in the country. Maduro, even though Trump tried to overthrow Maduro, after Trump faced the near assassination attempt, Maduro sent him a greeting, and he said, "I stand with you, and I know where this came from. I've been a victim of a similar thing." Very interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and then Anya Parampal has published this book talking about how there was a fight between Trump and John Bolton. John Bolton wanted to continue pursuing Venezuela, and Donald Trump kind of said, "I'm bored of it. I just don't want to talk about it anymore." And that it appears that Maduro sees the attempt to overthrow him in the aftermath of his electoral victory coming from the same place as the forces that tried to kill Donald Trump, the regime change, color revolution apparatus. And yeah, I think Maduro won this election fair and square. I mean, I monitored the Venezuelan election in 2015 when the right wing got control of the parliament. You wouldn't believe the level of transparency, right? Everyone who votes gets a ticket, and the tickets are then put in a box, and so the electronic vote has to match the paper tickets. And if it doesn't match, the whole thing does a recount. It's like the amount of transparency compared to our system, where it's just, I mean, it is so much more transparent. In our system, you either have electronic voting machines or you have paper ballots. They have both, basically. You vote electronically, you get a paper ballot, and then the paper ballot is one place and the electronic thing, and they have to match exactly, or else they do a recount of the entire precinct. Like it's very, very transparent. So I mean, I've been to the CNE office. I've seen how they do it. The basis upon which they often will try to claim that it's undemocratic is that there are people in Venezuela who have been caught, trying to blow up buildings or getting funding from the United States to travel around the world, urging countries to withdraw recognition from the Venezuelan government, or put sanctions on Venezuela, who are excluded from running. And those people are not allowed to participate because they're deemed to be in opposition to the Bolivarian Constitution. There's games they play to say it's not democratic, but it is very democratic. And when I was in Venezuela, I'd say it's about a third, right? You have a third of the people that are against the government because they look at Facebook and Twitter and they think communism bad, and they love the West, and they see that Venezuela is not as rich as the United States, and so they're convinced that if we adopted the American system, we would all become rich and stuff. And then you got a third of the people that are not communists, but they're like, you know what, Maduro made a lot of people's lives better. He's doing an okay job. He's a little extreme. I don't agree with him, whatever. And then you have a third of the people that are like diehard, who will go down fighting. And I met those people. I have a video on my channel, Inside a Bolivarian Commune. And there's people in Venezuela who they will go down fighting. They will never surrender. And it's that solid core, that third of the population. They will never surrender. And that's why Maduro is still in power. I met a woman who was, she was a homeless child, an orphan. She didn't speak Spanish. She spoke an indigenous language. She was adopted by a priest in central Caracas, a Catholic priest who ran an orphanage. The Catholic priest was also like a liberation theologist. And in her orphanage, every day they watched, or every Sunday they watched Allo Presidente, the presidential TV show of Hugo Chavez. She talked about how Hugo Chavez raised her, and he would every week he would have a book. And then at the orphanage, they read that book. They read Les Miserables. They read What Is to Be Done. They read The Role of the Individual in History by Plekhanov. And that Hugo Chavez, he
education.
Yeah, and that she said, Chavez taught me everything I know. Chavez was my father. And she said, I will die for communism. She said, I believe that is why I was born. That's what Jesus Christ intended for me to do. I will die for Hugo Chavez. And she's wearing her khaki army pants. They didn't show us their guns, but they have huge assault rifles, and there's a whole network of what they call colectivos, which are like communist cities that they have, or communist like neighborhoods that they've set up where, and they have their own army, the Bolivarian militia, that's separate from the regular Venezuelan military. Those people will never surrender. And I walked through a neighborhood where every single house had been paid for by an interest-free loan provided by the Venezuelan government. And before that, they lived in shacks without running water and electricity. It's because of Maduro and Hugo Chavez. They wiped out illiteracy in the country. When Chavez first came into office, Venezuela only had 12 public universities. Now it has 32. Okay? The amount of the huge amount of improving living conditions that happened, that you can't underestimate that. Illiteracy was wiped out. the people in the country who live in the mountains, the indigenous folks who had no say, were just kind of completely locked out. They all started voting under Hugo Chavez, and he started making their lives better, giving them schools and, giving them access to health care. There were a lot of people who gained their eyesight because of Hugo Chavez, because poverty creates conditions where if you're not properly nourished, you don't have proper food, you can lose your eyesight. And they brought Cuban doctors to do modern laser eye surgery on people, and thousands of people got their eyesight because of Hugo Chavez. I mean, it is massive what the government there has done. And the food crisis, that did not come until 2014, right? The narrative we generally get is, oh, communism just starves people. Well, there was not a problem with that until 2014, when Obama intentionally dropped the oil prices with Saudi Arabia. The oil prices dropped. Venezuela is largely centered around state-run oil. Mm-hmm. And then they ratcheted up the sanctions so that they couldn't import food. And so they were having trouble importing food because of U.S. sanctions. And the Venezuelan opposition, the rich people in the country, they have been caught many times burning food warehouses because they don't want people in the country to have food, because they want there to be instability so that Maduro is brought down. So the whole thing in mainstream media, and those times are past. Things have gotten much better in Venezuela in the last 3 or 4 years, right? The food crisis is over. Iran has supermarkets all over Venezuela. Iran is importing food.
Interesting. I didn't know that Iran was working so closely with the Venezuelans.
Iran and Venezuela are very, very close. And it's interesting because they're very different countries, obviously, but their economy is centered around state-run oil, right? And they both had a revolution that was not a communist revolution, but was anti-capitalist and religious, right? Iran, they call it not capitalism, but Islam. Khomeini said we're against communist atheism and Soviet social imperialism and American economic and military imperialism. Right. And in Venezuela, they say that their system is Bolivarian socialism. It's a combination of Marxism, Christianity, and indigenous traditions. And they have done a huge amount to improve people's lives. And life has really gotten better. They have a problem with corruption, but they've made great strides in improving that. And if they were going to be overthrown, it would have happened in 2014, 2015, 2016. Things have started getting better in recent years. How does he feel about a burgeoning hot war? I don't think it will happen, because the head of the military has said he's fully on Maduro's side. And they just had a big national march for unity, in which there were millions of people in the streets to support Maduro and to support the socialist government. They won this election. The right wing is trying to make as much trouble as they can, but it's in the rich neighborhoods, and they always do this after every election. And I hope that this will de-escalate in the next few days. But the main thing, and today, my friend Rainer Shea, he's out in Humboldt, California. I think you met him. He spoke at our conference.
Yeah.
He was out in Humboldt, California, speaking up, and that we need to speak up, and we need to say, look, the same deep state that brought us Kamala Harris, the color revolution apparatus, they're the ones trying to destabilize Venezuela. Right. And Maduro knows it. He knows that the people who are trying to overthrow him are the people who tried to kill Trump, and that it is the deep state, it is the imperialist CIA, et cetera, that are trying to bring down Venezuela. So that's what needs to be said. Right. And the woke people need to hear this, too, because, most of the woke people hate Venezuela. There's a small minority of people, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, Ben Norton, people like that support Venezuela, but are also into the woke thing. And they need to be called out, because the protests against Venezuela are all being pumped on social media. They're framing it as, oh, this is dark-skinned people. How dare you white leftists try to tell, they're doing the whole thing, right? The anti-Maduro movement is a woke movement. It's brought to you by the color revolution apparatus. It's brought to you by the CIA. Who tried to kill Trump? Well, I think his name was Thomas Matthew Crooks, and he was 20 years old.
That was something, though, that you can tell that whoever was working on that young man, he did not look. I don't know. There's something deeper going on with that young man.
Isn't it weird that someone was able to get as close as Lee Harvey Oswald was to Kennedy, exactly the same distance? That came out in the Secret Service hearings. If you watch the Secret Service hearings, I'm covering them for RT. Secret Service dropped the ball. Oh yeah, Secret Service completely dropped the ball. They didn't have a guard on the roof. One of the Yeah, one of the counter snipers, he signed off before Trump even got to the stage. He was like, "I'm out," and he just quit early. Right? That's come out in the text
That's
messages.
suspicious. Wow.
A little bit, yeah. The kid was spotted, and people were commenting on him. I agree with Zenny there. I think that this is more than just a coincidence. Let me just put it that way. I don't want to say I know what happened because I don't. But I think the idea that a lone wolf did this and it was just a random thing, I don't buy that. Right? I think that there's more to the story. I don't know exactly what the more to the story is. But it looks to me like, I think our government establishment doesn't trust Trump. It's not that Trump is some anti-imperialist hero. It's that Trump is not trusted by them to run the deep state. The deep state thinks he's a liability. And the fact that they responded to it, they wouldn't call it an assassination attempt, right? They called,
Yes.
Trump fell was Trump fell at a rally was the CNN headline. Like, that is almost a subtle message of them saying we approve of this, right? And now that it's come out that they're rigging the search engines, that if you type in assassination attempt on President TRUM, it comes up with Truman and the attempt to kill Truman by Puerto Rican nationalists in 1950, right? It's like, what is going on here, right? I mean, they're so obviously sending a message that they approve of this, So I think Donald Trump is going to win this election, and I also think that that's going to make our job a little bit harder because there is a faction in the Trump camp that is trying to blame all of the stuff that people voting for Trump are against on China, right? They're trying to say it's all a conspiracy from China. Biden works for China. Kamala Harris is an agent of China. China's communist. And we need to push back against that, right? Because that is not the truth. And that, Epoch Times, I'm very suspicious of Epoch Times. I've never, there's a lot in the Trump camp that's not good that I disagree with, pro-Israel, et cetera. So, there's a lot there in the Trump camp that I think that's going to escalate, right? The more pro-imperialist, pro-war aspects of the Trump camp are going to be escalated once Trump is in office because that's going to be their only hope. But I think Trump will win, and I think that's for the best. Anything would be better than Kamala Harris. That's my view. And I hope for peace on the Korean Peninsula. I was flown out to Los Angeles to give a talk 2 months ago to Los Angeles Family Church, where I spoke about peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula to a very historically anti-communist church, the Unification Church. They flew me out there, and I gave a speech to a room full of 70 people there, different backgrounds, Koreans, Japanese folks that very much were very optimistic about Donald Trump going to Korea. And that church had a lot to do with making it happen. They own the Washington Times, the Republican newspaper in D.C. And they, before Reverend Sun Myung Moon died, he was actually given the highest medal in North Korea, the Medal of Reunification by Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-il. Because he had done so much to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. And they even invited me to speak at their church service the following Sunday morning. So I did. And I had them put the photo behind me on the screen of Reverend Moon and Kim Il-sung hugging each other. Because I said, I tell people about how important this photo is because Reverend Sun Myung Moon was tortured by Kim Il-sung, right? He was put in a prison camp and he was tortured by Kim Il-sung. But after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1994, he got on a plane and he went to North Korea and he and Kim Il-sung hugged and forgave each other. And that is such a great example of Christian forgiveness. If someone tortured you and put you in a prison camp and then you fled North Korea, you moved to South Korea, you start an anti-communist religious movement, and you dedicate your life to fighting communism. But then the Soviet Union falls and you realize that forgiveness is the way and that truth and reconciliation is the way to bring about one heavenly Korea. That's beautiful, right? And, there's plenty of criticism of Reverend Sun Myung Moon on the internet. I'm not here to defend everything that man did, right? And I know that they're in kind of a moment where they're coming to terms with different aspects. I know his wife is now leading the church and she's very open about some of the bad things that went on and all that. And I'm not a member of them and I'm not here to go over their whole record. But I am blown away that he was able to forgive Kim Il-sung. You know what I'm saying? And that he was able to hug Kim Il-sung and offer that and give that great example of Christian forgiveness. And then to invest heavily in North Korea with his own money, right? And to set up the North Korean state-owned car company, et cetera. And that I find to be amazing, right? Well, there must be an inside joke here, right? There must be an inside joke.
I don't know if you've noticed them fighting with each other. They beef with each other in the chat.
Oh, I see. People are fighting? That's what's happening in the chat?
Yeah, it's nothing towards you. It's just they're fighting each other, but it's funny.
Okay.
Frederick does appreciate you as a guest. Yeah, I'm so glad Caleb could come back to our channel here. And
look, it's always fun.
He's such a wealth of information, and he goes live regularly. So I put his link in the description box. So please subscribe to his channel.
Yeah. So it looks like tomorrow I'm going to be on George Galloway's show, and I'm going to go on. There's a guy who used to work for InfoWars, one of the InfoWars reporters. I can't remember his name. I'm going to go on his show. So I'm making my rounds.
Yes.
So I hope that Kamala doesn't imprison me if she wins the election. Let me just put it that way. So
Irish for pub, that is slander.
Huh?
I'm responding to someone in the comments. Just that is slander and lies.
Okay. All right. And Zenny is asking if I am a Christian, and the answer to that is yes, right? I am a Christian. I am a follower of Jesus Christ. And actually, in this book, I quote from the New Testament, and I thought that might be a great way to end the interview.
Yeah.
So I quote the book of Acts, verse 4:42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. And all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. That's the book of Acts, chapter 4. So
beautiful.
Yep. So there we go.
So yes, let's see the book one more time. This is the special edition. You can't get this one anymore.
Right.
But you can get his book.
Yes. Amazon restored it yesterday. So yeah.
Yes.
Very good. Kamala get it while
Harris
you can.
And the Future of America.
An essay in 3 parts. Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. So I never had any idea that it would blow up to be this big, but I'm honored, and the fight continues.
I am glad. That you wrote this book.
Thank you. And I'm glad you're on here streaming and doing the great work that you do, Terry. My best wishes to you and everyone that is close to you. Stay strong.
We'll do our best, I suppose. Yes, I'll drop the link again for his channel.
All right. I think I'm out. Thanks.
Yes, head out, and I will wrap up myself. Wasn't that nice to have Caleb on, everybody? So yeah, I'm dropping the link to his channel again. And let me drop the link to, you can buy his book. It has been put back on Amazon, where it was censored for about a week. Oh, I'm sorry. Caleb is out. I'm sorry, Joey. You were not fast enough. All right, here is the link to purchase his book on Amazon. And then he's also doing a fundraiser to, let's see. Oh, yeah, he wants to get this book circulating at the DNC. So, yeah, if you... If you're interested in supporting that, you can donate there. And let's see, there was one other link he gave me. So let me get that here. Yeah, you can also purchase his book via Gumroad if you prefer. So let me send that to you all. Yes, Joey. Well, you can ask me a question. I don't even know what the ACP is. What's the ACP? American College of Physicians? And I'm sure it means something else. Caleb is so prolific. I don't even know how many books he has now. He has published a myriad of books. He's probably, I don't know, one of my most prolific friends I've made in my life, I have to say. Hi. And he goes live regularly. The American Communist Party, is that it? Well, I'm not familiar with them so much. They are the new Communist Party. I didn't even get him to talk about CPI, y'all. All right. Hi, sweetie. Hi, sweetie. And Nero's here. Well, great show tonight. I'm so glad you all could be here and, keep it lively in the chat. Thanks for some good questions and participating. I know some of you came in later, but you can always go to the beginning to kind of hear more about Kamala Harris and some of the interesting discussion that we had about her that's available in his book. And yeah, he's got one of only 2 books written that are about her from a critical framework. So that's pretty exciting too. And he's making his rounds. So yeah, please go check out his channel and see who else interviews him. He's going to be on George Galloway tomorrow. So that's exciting. Well, anyway, I'm done for tonight. There's not any bedtime story tonight, y'all. You're going to have to read to yourselves. I'll probably be back tomorrow, though, to continue. And I do have a guest coming on next week. So, hi. Wow. Was that polite at all? You just made a mess. Why'd you do that? All right. Well, I'm sorry we couldn't get to this super chat. But anyway, thank you. And have a good night, y'all. Keep it strange, right?